Well, speaking of culture, because I do want to shift to our next topic. This is a conversation that Walt Gray was able to have with the head of Black Lives Matter, and we're talking locally here in Sacramento, and culture and diversity in our community here in Northern California, and the relationship that the Black community specifically has, or the lack thereof, with law enforcement. And this is all on the heels of what happened with Stephon Clark, shot and killed by Sac PD. So here we are more than 2 weeks later. And there have been a ton of protests. One is happening today at 3 o'clock, more slated for indefinitely. We don't know when these will stop.
I think it's every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
And this is until the SAC PD, until changes are made. You touched on it in your story.
So what did Tanya Faison, who's the head of BLM Sacramento, what did she have to say to you about what is happening in the state of Sacramento right now?
Well, they want legislation. They want legislation at the state level that would require law enforcement to not pursue situations like the way that it was. She said to me yesterday, which I didn't use in the story, she's like, for the taxpayer, why would you want a helicopter flying at night pursuing a suspect who was only breaking into cars? Is that what you want?
Right.
I think the biggest picture is, and I can only speak in generalities here, and not each person, but I think Black people historically have a distrust of law enforcement based on going way back to the rural Mississippi sheriff, and there were a lot of lynchings from 1880. The last lynching in Mississippi was 1968, which is pretty dang recently.
Not long ago.
So I think there's just a distrust, which is when you're Black, that's kind of how you view things. When you're driving around in your car, you know, you're kind of pulled over for a vehicle check and a license check. And like, officer, why did you pull me over? Just checking you out. It's like,
here's the thing,
there's more people like that pulled over, which builds this element of, I think, fear. We wonder about Stephon Clark. And in my discussions, this is what's coming out of it. Was he running because he was being chased, or was he running because he was in fear? So there's two different things going on there. That and Ariana, it goes into a giant stew. It goes into a giant stew of this is how Black people feel, and then there's this other element where white people, and again I speak in only generalities here, where white people are like, look man, if you didn't do anything wrong, why were you running? Or the big one is when law enforcement contacts you or encounters you, drop what you're doing and comply and you will go home alive. So both sides have very different views of how things are, and there isn't anything going on in the middle at all.
And I think if it were that clear, and I know you said it's a stew, but if you drop your hands, if you stop doing whatever you're doing when the police address you, nothing will happen. If that were truly the case, the Alton Sterling situation wouldn't have happened.
Oh, you can give names where it didn't go right, but I'm speaking again in generalities. The generalities are, if you're asked to comply or to drop your weapon, there's a hell of a better chance that it'll be a better outcome. And this is what Black Lives Matter tells people. Comply with the law, man.
For sure.
And we'll deal with filing a complaint or a lawsuit later on when you're still alive. But if you don't comply, if you run, if you go for your pocket, if you pull out a cell phone, that's not going to go well for you historically. And I think that Black Lives Matter realizes that. Their point in the Clark shooting thing is he didn't have a weapon, A, and B, how come you're being shot at 20 times when there's no return fire?
Right. I don't even think
and do you need to shoot 20 bullets at someone who's allegedly breaking into cars? Okay, was this a SWAT situation with a hostage or a pursuit of a murder suspect? And I'm only telling you, this is how they feel about it.
You know what? I think that what was really telling was the actual conversation that you guys had. And I want to give you guys the opportunity to see that conversation really unfold, because Walt was able to bring in questions from the viewers and integrate them into the interview. And I think it was a really compelling discussion that they have. So guys, check that out.
Scott wants to know about Stephon running from the police, whether or not, if he had just stopped and whether this had had a better ending.
I don't know that happened. From what I've heard, he was actually not running from police. Camille wants to know, do you believe that the tactics that are currently being used are gaining support of the majority of citizens? Are you interested in that?
I think that people have already pretty much chosen a side, probably since Trayvon Martin, maybe a little bit earlier than that. This either mobilizes them or it has the people that don't like us officially not liking us.
Did the blocking of I-5 accomplish what you wanted, or do you think it obviously upset a lot of people? Is that all come with it?
I feel that we did accomplish that because a lot of people have come out to protest after that because they were stopped in traffic. Also, there were a lot of people that were stopped that jumped out and joined us. There were people in their trucks rooting with us, a truck driver. So yeah, I feel like it does, we do inch by inch achieve a goal.
Bob wants to know, why do you hate people who don't see things your way?
I don't hate anybody, I love everybody. I'm a loving person.
Except for law enforcement.
I don't hate police officers.
Really?
I hate the system.
Okay.
I hate the culture. So that's what I hate.
Dave wants to know, would you be willing to do a ride along with SAC Police or the Sheriff's Department just to see what they encounter?
Never in my life.
Why?
I don't want to. I've already tried to build relationships with city government, including police chiefs and sergeants. And I've sat down with cadets and given them information on how they could be better in black communities. I've tried to build, and it's only wasted my time. And I'm not here to waste my time anymore.
So there's one thing in here which a lot of people have asked me about, where Tanya says that she doesn't believe he was running. And clearly, if you look at the helicopter video of the shooting, he was jumping over fences and running. So my interpretation of what she meant was, at the time he was shot, he was not running. And at the time the police officers were saying, drop your gun, he was not running at that time. Because that, to me, that's the only thing it could mean.
Right.
Because the rest of it is pretty well documented that he was running from law enforcement.
Right.
So I was tracking the comments that were coming through as you guys were watching the video, which was I was hoping you would react to it. But a lot of people are coming through and saying that Black Lives Matter, the movement, needs to be eradicated and that needs to go away. And I want to know from you guys and from you why you think that would be an effective way to handle the situation. I'm curious about that because I think as an organization, as a nonprofit organization, you have many people that stand up for what they believe is right and try to help better their people so that in this particular case, their people stay safe.
Because I think for a lot of people, that's the easy route. They're uncomfortable talking about this. They're tired of talking about this. This is not their story. They don't identify with it. It's shifted so far from what it was originally. Just get rid of it. Because when we're uncomfortable, we don't want to deal with it. And I think, though, because this is so controversial right now, clearly what's needed to happen in terms of race relations in this country and relationships between law enforcement and different races in this country, that clearly is still an issue. So I don't think that's the answer, is eradicating, because that would be the easy way out.
They're not going away. They are not going away. And the reason why Black Lives Matter exists is because they feel that the traditional way of doing things, you know, NAACP, is old school ways, and they need to ramp it up. So I think if people are thinking that Black Lives Matter should go away, it's not going to go away. There might be some suggestions of different ways Black Lives Matter could conduct their business, which might be something, but I think that their whole thing is to create situations and make it uncomfortable, which would facilitate change. That's where they're coming from.
That's the idea of all protesters.
And my concern is this, is that they view the protests, stopping traffic, things like that, the continued protest as being very effective. Just yesterday, they had somebody, a lawmaker, I forget his name at the time.
Kevin McCarty.
And he represents this area. He's introducing legislation. So clearly, in their view, what has been happening is very successful. However, the people that have distanced themselves from this conversation and say, okay, I understand your point of view, but I don't want to be, I want to go to the Kings game, or I want to drive on the freeway.
Stop inconveniencing me.
Exactly. And they see this as, this is not effective. Please stop doing this. And the other side is saying, no, this is working. And now you have a situation where both one point of view is committed to this has got to, these protests in this way have to stop. The other side is saying these are very effective, they're not stopping. And that's a problem, because this case, this may take months to investigate.
Absolutely.
And the tensions, they don't level off. They slowly rise until you see incidents like we saw on Saturday over the weekend where someone was hit by a car. There's a protester and continued. And that wasn't even with the Sacramento Police Department. That was with the Sheriff's Department and the CHP. So now you have other law enforcement getting drawn into this. My concern is this. I live here. This is my town. I live in Sacramento. I understand everybody's point of view. My whole issue is and concern is that everybody's getting angrier about this situation. And we've seen this before because at some point something happens in these high tension populated areas like what happened on Saturday. That was with the vehicle. I mean, what's next? And that's a concern because even if you're a bystander, this could get violent very quickly.
Well, I will say the city council meeting that happened last night where once again they had asked for people in the community to come and voice their opinions. It was a different tone. People still very angry, not as crowded. Stephon, as we know, Stephon Clark's brother was not there. At least I didn't see him in the video that I saw. He has now come out and said, stop blocking the roads, don't protest in front of the Kings, in front of Golden One Center. So that has shifted. But when I listened, there was this one gentleman, Caucasian man, stepped up to the podium and said, this is a story I just want to share. And he talked about this woman in his life. And she's a Caucasian woman. She has a couple of white kids, and she adopted 2 black kids. And she wrote this letter, and he read the letter aloud. And it's talking about the difference in raising all of her kids in the same household right now, and how it is a very different experience for her 2 black kids than it is in this country for her white kids. And hearing it from a white perspective, talking about, I'm raising 2 different races in my house right now, and tell me that that my black kids aren't getting stopped just out of curiosity by police in this case, but my white kids haven't experienced that. So the conversations that were happening here, and you saw a lot of the black people stand up and snap, like, thank you for sharing that story. So I did feel a different tone yesterday at the city council meeting. That there wasn't rage. It was, there was rage at the podium, but there wasn't Stephon coming up and sitting on the desk and yelling in the mayor's face. Because now we are a little past the 2-week mark since the case. So I think that's hopeful. There's change. These conversations are still happening, which is a good thing, and people are still showing up to those meetings.
That's an excellent point. It's not universally that this is going to happen and tensions are always rising. That's a good point. But what I'm saying also is that consider what happened on Saturday. That may be the case for City Council, which has security and kind of a different environment out in the streets. Things can get wild really quickly because
I wonder if I could get inside the Sacramento Police Department's briefing meeting, whether the chief goes, do not shoot any black person right now for any reason, and whether there's some pullback going on where you better be dang well sure there's like somebody's got a cannon in their hand before you do anything. Because I don't know that this city could take something on a back-to-back.
Or any city
but the city also can't stand for a police department that doesn't want to police their area.
No, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying right now in this climate, if for some reason something like this happened again very soon, holy cow, I can't even imagine. And I feel for the police officers. This isn't anything against them. And another point where I just saw a quote come through wasn't one of the police officers who shot Stephon Clark black.
And does that make a difference?
No, it doesn't, not according to Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter says when you become a cop, you become blue. You become a cop, your race is secondary. So if 2 black cops shot Stephon Clark, to Black Lives Matter, it's cops no matter what color you are. The issue is the system. The issue is the system, not the people within the system. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that.
Well, this is according to AP. So this happened yesterday. The legislation would charge the standard from using reasonable force to necessary force. So they want to limit when officers can open fire.
And be covered. And be covered. Because as it is now, I think the 2 officers who shot Stephon Clark are well within. That's reasonable force. That chances are really strong nothing's going to happen to them in terms of the legal system. But necessary force really raises the bar as to what are the circumstances when you can discharge your weapon on someone. And that's what's happening now. That's the next thing.
You're talking about law enforcement. I'm just curious to know, like, moving forward, this generation, who right now wants to be a police officer? because I know that the rates are down. I remember talking to the former police chief when I was in Vegas, and he was saying that right now, because there is that stigma against law enforcement in general, people are like, why would I go and be part of something where I'm automatically going to be a target out there of someone who someone else hates? Why do I want to make a living out of that when I have families to get home to as well?
It depends on what police department you're working for.
Sure. Exactly.
Chief Hahn was the police chief in Roseville before he came down here. Roseville's looking like a pretty sweet job right now, considering what's the biggest thing in Roseville? A little breaking and entering. Somebody steals a jacket from the Galleria. I mean, I'm of course being a jerk about that, but that's a whole different dynamic than being so.
But does that present a problem?
I would say you could be a cop or a deputy in a lot of places, but when you get into an urban area, that's where your paycheck is a lot bigger, but that's where your risk is a lot bigger. But if you really want to be in law enforcement, you can be in law enforcement in a lot of areas where you're not going to have this type of a conflict.
Sure.
Right.
I think that people get into law enforcement because they're intrinsically motivated, or in a lot of cases because it's part of your family's history.
And
I don't think that people are going to, people in those situations where it's part of your family's history, they're not going to not be a cop because of that. Shoot, the number of cop TV shows has shot through the roof in the past couple of years.
It's amazing how they solved the whole thing in 1 hour.
Isn't that
I mean, from the crime committed to the crime and the judge saying sentence, it happens in 1 hour.
It's good TV.
That's why we like that.
Okay, TV.
And back in the day, Matlock, you only needed one suit for like 5 episodes. That's it, a gray suit, you're done.
I'm glad we were able to bring it to a lighter note, and we started a lot of amazing conversations with you guys, and we'll continue to track them on our Facebook page. But guys, it's National Hug a TV Person Day,
right.
So I want to end with a hug.
I'm sorry, Rob.
Group
There we go.
Have a good day, guys.